Hey y'all, it's me again, and on Goldfish Keepers Forum, I was asked by a member, Jim, I think his username is Orange Crush, on there to do a video about swim bladder disease. And swim bladder disease is a fairly common thing to occur with fancy goldfish, especially. The swim bladder itself is an organ that helps the fish stay afloat. It helps them with their buoyancy, and sometimes you can have a swim bladder defect. It's a birth defect with the fish, and that can potentially cause major issues throughout their life. A lot of newbies mistake swim bladder disease for simple constipational issues, and that's kind of what I wanted to talk about, the difference between one or the other. I have had goldfish with swim bladder disease, and I've had them with constipation, so I've kind of saw both variations, and I would like to try to help other fish keepers determine what their fish has, because I know with me, when Bernard got sick, I lost him the end of March or the beginning of April, and I had him about almost 4 months at that time. And I don't think it matters if you have a fish 4 months or 4 years, 14 years. You're just as attached to them as you would be no matter how long you've had them. He was a smaller one. I got him and Josephine at the same time, and Josephine was always bigger than he was, which isn't uncommon. Most of the time, females can be bigger than males, and I didn't really think anything about it at that time. I noticed that, on occasion he would get a little floaty, but I wasn't really suspecting swim bladder, because I could give him some peas or something and he would be fine. And so I originally thought that was the problem. He just has some digestive issues, but that wasn't the case. So with constipation issues, you really, and this may sound totally gross, but you can tell a lot from how your fish poops. And what color is it? Is it consistent? A lot of times with constipational issues, I've seen it's really, really stringy, like not usual stringy, but I mean like hair stringy. And you'll see sometimes it'll be like the usual greenish looking tint, and then in the middle it'll have like an air bubble. It'll be clear or something. That is definitely a sign of digestive issues. And when that occurs, there's usually something to do with what you're feeding them. I know a lot of times with flake food, that can definitely cause digestive issues in your fish. And that can be fixed. I mean, you just start feeding them. I know in my case, when I started feeding Rapashi Soylent Green, I saw a big difference in their digestive system, because they would poop more often, like right after they ate, but it was very consistent. You didn't see, as much air and, that kind of stuff. And they don't have trouble with that anymore. Plus, I don't have to feed peas anymore, because actually the Rapashi Soylent Green has that in it. It has like a lot of fiber and stuff that can help with their issues, and that's why I like it. When you have a fish with constipation issues, that's fixable, And you really have to, I know with fish, you can't pick them up and take them to the vet like you would with a dog or a cat. You kind of have to figure it out yourself. And that's tricky, and that's why fish keeping is a continuous learning experience, even for me. And with them especially, you can tell a lot by their poop. I already said that, and you really can. How they're, how they're feeling, with their personality. If there's any changes, you can tell if a fish doesn't feel good. Also, don't run to the pet store and get a bunch of antibiotics. Don't do it, because there's a happy medium of when to medicate and when to not medicate. And a lot of times that stuff is fixable. And you can, I know with me, with newbies especially, or just any fish keeper in general, if your fish is acting off, or you think they don't feel so great, they're not acting themselves, they're very lethargic, change their water. That should be the first thing that you do. Well, actually, the first thing you should do is check your water parameters and then change your water. Nitrate can make a fish floaty. I know that can happen if your nitrate is high. Your fish can get floaty, and just by changing the water and cleaning up your aquarium, I mean, that could fix that problem. And you don't need to run out and get medication, because medication is so expensive for fish, and a lot of times you don't need it. I use continuously, I use salt in my goldfish aquariums. Every time I replace water, I replace salt as well, which is just, aquarium salt at the pet store. I think here you can get like a big box of it for like $5. So it's really not expensive. Plus, it kind of keeps the opportunist pathogens at bay. And it's just good for your fish in general, especially the goldfish. I find that they do a lot better with salt in their water than they do without it. So that can help them as well. Another thing about them is, I'm sorry, I keep looking off. I just did a water change on the first aquarium, and they're acting silly. So, and the Knight is just getting my attention. He thinks he's getting fed. That's funny. Anyway, so that's constipational issues. The only time you want to, medicate a fish is if you've done everything else and nothing is working, or you are 100% sure that this is a bacterial infection, a parasite, or something that you need antibiotics for, then it's okay. But make sure it's not your water quality, because a lot of times it is. And fancy goldfish can, change quickly depending on their water. And if you change their water, like a lot of it, and you may see that after you do that, they're not floaty anymore, or they act a lot better, or they're like interacting with other fish or they're eating, then it was probably something with your water. And that's an easy fix, and it doesn't cost you really anything to do that. So with swim bladder, people get the two confused a lot. And I would so rather have a fish with digestive issues than I would with swim bladder. I hate having a fish with swim bladder. For me, it's like it's a death sentence. I mean, and I hate to be morbid, but in my opinion, it's not something that you usually can treat. And when you have a fish with swim bladder, in Bernard's case, he was very floaty at first, and I really thought that it was constipational. And so, I fed him the peas, and I, kept up with his water changes, and he done okay. I mean, it was one of those things with swim bladder. It's like, you'll have relapses, like you'll have good days and you'll have bad days. And he had a lot of good days. At first, he was himself, and he was spunky, and he loved following Josephine around. They were best of friends. I got them the same day from the same store in the same tank. So they had been together a long time. And then, after a while, he was always at the top of the tank. He couldn't keep himself upright. He was kind of swimming off on his side, and that's when I started to realize that this wasn't a constipation issue. He had a defect in his swim bladder, and that was hard for me to accept. I really, really, really wanted it just to be a constipational issue that I could fix. And so, me being, me trying to help the fish, there's always, swim bladder can be caused by a couple of things. It can be the birth defect of the swim bladder itself, which is pretty common, unfortunately, or it can be due to a bacterial infection or parasite, and that's when you want to treat with a pretty heavy duty antibiotic. In my opinion, rarely is it caused from bacterial or a parasite, and it usually is the defect, and that's not treatable. But I did quarantine him, and I did do an antibiotic treatment just in case I was wrong and it was bacterial. I did that because I was so hoping that I would not lose him. He was getting very sick, and I tried it, and it did nothing. And I knew in the back of my mind that it wasn't going to, but I tried, and it didn't work. And he, over his last, I would say about the last week of his life, he got very, very sick. And it was so hard for me to watch him struggle to swim. I mean, he got to the point where he didn't swim at all. I mean, he would just sit in the corner and float on one side, and the current would kind of take him wherever. I mean, he just couldn't fight it anymore. And I think Josephine knew that he was ill. She never left him, and it was amazing to see how fish know. I mean, they say that dogs and cats know if you're sick, and but fish do too. And she was with him until the end. I finally, one day I got up, and he was almost gone, and he was just suffering so much, and I couldn't watch him. I couldn't watch him suffer anymore. I couldn't make myself do it, and it was the humane thing to do was to euthanize him, and I knew it, and I had never done it before. Like I said, Roy, the one that I had with Johnny, my first two goldfish ever, Roy died when he was about 10 years old of natural causes, so I really didn't have, to do anything. I just walked in one day and he was gone. And Johnny was the same way. When he died, he was, I think, about 14 years old. So, I just kind of walked in one day and he was gone too. So I've never had to put one down. And that, even thinking about that now, it makes me want to cry because I hated that day and I never want to relive that day again. It was just the method itself, the clove oil method is what I used, where you take the fish out into like a bowl of water, mix clove oil in, and it basically puts them to sleep. It works the same way as if you take a dog or something to the vet and they put them to sleep. It's pretty much the same thing, and it's very quick and painless. And after I put him in, I walked away. I went into the next room. I refused to watch him. I couldn't do it. I couldn't make myself do it. And I remember Josephine, when I took him out, she was so like lonely. Like she just sat and she knew, I think she knew what I was doing, and she just sat in the spot that he was last in and she didn't move. And after, he passed and I got rid of him, and I came back in the living room where she was, and that night she wouldn't eat. She wouldn't, she was grieving and she wasn't responsive to me, and it scared me because Josephine, if you've watched my Instagram videos, Josephine is very interactive, and it scared me. So, she'd been with him all her life, and I decided that I was going to run out to PetSmart and just see what other fish that they had. And they had a knight at that time, and, he was a big, gorgeous Aranda, and I could tell that he was male, and I thought, I'm going to get him and see if maybe he would make her happy again. And thankfully, he did. And she, they have been together ever since. And I hope to God I don't have to put another fish down, because that is the worst feeling I've ever experienced. I'm not an emotional person. My family, anybody in my family will tell you that I'm not emotional. I can do anything and not be squeamish. I'm a nurse, so, blood and gore and guts doesn't bother me. I can think of maybe twice in my life that I've cried. I don't do it. It's not me. And that was just one day that really it would be, I guess, the third time I cried, because I did cry. But seeing her, react the way she did with Knight was really, really made my heart happy, because they were just so good together, and I've had some surprise fry with them, so I guess they're pretty happy. But, on to that, swim bladder defect, a lot of people say that, if you treat them with an antibiotic, it fixes it. And it doesn't. And especially if it's the defect itself, you're not gonna be able to fix that. That's a birth defect that isn't fixable. And actually, I've not really said this before. I've kept it to myself for a long time. But Black Beauty, the one that is blind, that's in the tank behind me, she has a swim bladder defect. And I knew when I brought her home, the next day when I started watching her, I knew that she did. And that, I didn't want to make myself believe it, but I've come to terms with that she does, and it's not nearly as bad as his was. She does very well. Every once in a while, you'll see her like flip over on her side real fast and, get her balance back, but she doesn't do anything like, major like he did. So I have a lot of faith in her that, she will live a long time, even with this defect. And, you know, as long as I'm keeping up with her water and I'm giving her good quality food, I think she'll be okay, and she has so far. So that's kind of the difference between swim bladder and constipation. And just because your fish is floaty doesn't mean it's swim bladder. You know, check the things I've talked about, and you know, make sure that it's not just they're just not constipated, because it happens in these fish. I mean, their organs are squished in these little tiny bodies, and it happens. But I hope that if anybody's watching this that has a fish that's doing this, that I've helped you in some way, and maybe and hopefully it is just a constipation issue, and you can fix that with the things that I've talked about. So I will see y'all next time. I hope you enjoyed the video.